Welcome to the Ash Cloud. I'm Ash Sweeting. The capability and use of AI has increased hugely over the last couple of years. So today we've got Aidan Connolly joining us once again to talk about what's changed since he was last on the program a couple of years ago and where he sees the future of AI in the agricultural industries. Aidan, thank you very much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
About 2 years ago, we caught up and we were discussing AI and how that was evolving from the context of agricultural systems and agricultural technology. What has changed in that interim period over the last 2 years in terms of AI and technology development, especially for the livestock sector?
I suppose, Ash, thanks for the question. I feel in some ways everything has changed, and then sometimes I feel the next day nothing has changed. There are a lot of people who I meet when I get the chance to travel, which I do, as you know, extensively, go to conferences, speak at conferences, and I challenge them about how they're using AI, and I see a certain percentage of the audience with very blank looks. And the concern being that they're blank because they haven't even taken a position on what they're doing or how they're going to do it. So I would say the larger agri organizations are doing the basics. They are using ChatGPT, Gemini, and or the other large language models, the LLMs, to shape their day-to-day business, particularly in areas such as finance, particularly in areas such as form filling out, writing reports. So what I would call very much first generational use of AI. What we don't see as much is the more innovative use of AI to fundamentally change the systems, change the processes within the farm, within the business, within the food supply chain. And I fear that that comes from our Achilles heel in agriculture, which for me is the quality of the data that we're collecting. A lot of data today is still being captured by humans, is still being recorded in the form of notebooks, is being transcribed into a system, a database. And within all those three things I've just mentioned, you can see the flaws and the opportunities for mistakes to occur, misinterpretation. And as a result, with these flawed data sets, it makes it very hard for the AI systems to interpret that information and make smarter decisions for us. So when I go to conferences, I always start up by saying, think of cleaning up your data. And that seems to be a puzzling concept, but it isn't when you think about what I've just described, that medication records, use of fertilizers, the carbon footprint on the farm, et cetera, are not being measured autonomously by sensors and by devices. And as a result, the data is not really fit for purpose for doing what we're going to need to in the age of AI.
You bring up a very important point, because any AI or machine learning model or anything can only develop solutions or insights or however you describe it, on the data that it has available. It can't like, when a rancher or a farmer's on their farm and they're out on the tractor or out on the horse or wherever they are taking in information constantly through sight and sound and potentially smell and feel and all those sorts of things. But that's not feeding into these databases, as you say. And you've got the fact that there's this data is incomplete, which it always will be. But you've also got the fact that the major AI companies are moving forward at 1,000 miles an hour, and developing their models. So how do you see that differential there?
Yeah, I think that's you've hit the nail on the head. If you listen to the podcasts uh, that I watch and listen to, and you presumably do as well, and you think of things like Peter Diamandis and his group at Singularity U, and they're describing improvements in Claude or Gemini of the order of 5,000 fold from one week to the next. So
It's insane.
it's insane. It's impossible to comprehend. And at the same time, we're talking about most of people in farming are not using AI, are using it at a very basic level. So the fear is we will get left behind to an even greater degree. Now, when you look at deals like the one that's excited us all, the Halter deal, um, you know that the thinking behind that is how do we capture data and then use that data to make better decisions for the betterment of the food supply chain and the planet. So people outside our industry are seeing it, but even they are shocked when they realized how flawed our information gathering is. And frankly, like I after I did my review with 40 experts in food and agri and those who are agri looking at AI and the AI people looking at food and agri and thinking about where AI could fit. When I did that with John Power, what we really noticed, what we really took home was that people needed to think about the ways in which they were structuring their business to prepare for what we were calling the bullet train moment. And bullet train's a nice analogy, not just because of the speed of it, it is moving at a bullet train, but also to design the bullet train in Japan. They didn't just put a faster train on tracks. They had to redesign the tracks, they had to redesign the stations, they had to redesign everything had to change. And that's where we are today. We created this acronym DRIVE, DRIVE standing for data, get your data right, clean your data, curate your data, collect your data better, etc. Or for run purposeful pilots, lots of discussions with our experts about what pilots work and what pilots don't work. And our take home was make sure there's a purpose to it. It's not just a fishing trip, there's a purpose to it. Insiders preferred the I in Drive, meaning don't rely upon outside consultants to do it all for you. You need to develop your own expertise in your farm, in your company. Um, V for VIPs, meaning that VIPs, the owners, the CEOs, the C-suite need to be involved in AI and not delegated to the IT department or to somebody more junior in the organization. And E, execute it now, get it done right away. I think that's still the recommendation I would make. But typically, and we've said it a couple of times, where I come back to is make sure aside from the data that you have is clean and usable, but also think about how you construct a farming business, an agribusiness, to collect really important information. So when you ask that question, why do my cows have a collar? Why am I collecting all this information from sensors in the field on moisture content in the soils? Why am I trying to use cameras? Why am I, et cetera, et cetera? Why am I measuring the breath of my animals for methane? Um, all of that's just data that we just need to get better at collecting, ask less questions about why we're doing it, and just do it, and then start to allow the AI to make better interpretations of how we're managing today.
As always, when we talk, you say some great things, and it kind of opens up a door for which question I would like to ask next, because there's a whole bunch that came.
Flattery will get you a long way, Ash, in life, as
Oh,
you know.
brilliant!
So
That's the
thank you.
plan,
Well,
mate.
but I'll take it. I'll take it.
That's the plan. Um, I guess firstly, the difference between cropping systems and animal production systems in terms of, I guess the possibilities and the challenges. The most obvious from my perspective is that when you put a plant in the ground that stays exactly where it is and you know where it's going to be in a week's time or a month's time, when you put an animal somewhere, it moves around and it's sentient and it chooses what it eats to a certain extent, and it has a lot more autonomy. Um, but how do you see that those two differences?
Look, I could see, I can appreciate what you're saying, but frankly, until recently, all we knew about plants was that we planted them, and when we harvest them, we knew what we were getting. And we have started to collect information on plants, maybe not on a minute by minute basis, but certainly on a daily or weekly basis by utilizing information from satellites most easily and drones. And there are sensor systems out there, but they suffer the same issues that sensors do in any agricultural environment. It's a tough place to collect information. And if you go to an almond grove or some of these systems in California, you'll hear from the growers. They'll say, "Yeah, but a third of my sensors aren't working today because the environment is tough." I do think animals present their own unique challenges, but therefore the value of that information is even greater because we don't have it. I've made the case that dairy has a unique opportunity because we milk cows 3 times a day. That's 3 times we are getting information, data, not just about what that milk is and the quality of that milk, but also indicators about the health of the animal, the fertility of the animal, the nutrition, how we've been feeding that animal, how we've been managing that animal. So, in other words, by mining the milk for fat, protein, milk yield, and then going into milk urea, nitrogen, antimicrobial resistance, progesterone, etc., we could gain and can gain 3 times a day extraordinary information about that cow. Not quite as easy in other species, but perhaps with the hen, you can't really break the egg as easily, but the hen gives you an egg every day, more or less. So collecting information, even if those animals are moving around, is for me is more valuable than perhaps is in plants. It's a little harder to do, but the gains can be greater, and we have certain opportunities. You can, because of the movement of chickens and pigs, you could weigh them potentially several times a day. And when you do that, then you have information about how they're getting on. You can watch them and see if their behavior and guess as to their health. So it's not quite as difficult, I feel. It's just again a question of getting these technologies out into the fields and starting to use them. They typically have not been as good as promised. Of course, they typically have not been as easy to use as promised. But as I've described, the gap is huge, and therefore the value of that gap is even greater than perhaps it is in terms of crops that are grown in the field.
I think what you're saying, it brings to mind the heart rate monitors that many humans, the Fitbits or the Aura rings that people wear, and go back not so long ago, and you may have had your heart rate monitored once a year for 30 seconds or a minute when you're at the doctor's, and then as the ability to gather data on heart rate and heart rate variability, um, as those data sets have become available, there's so much more information that's telling us, including or especially elite athletes will monitor their heart rate constantly, and it will guide how hard they train over the next days and how they manage their recovery. And it shows that once you start getting that data, a whole bunch of opportunities and deeper thinking on what is possible will open up. But unless you've actually got a chance to play with those preliminary data sets, you won't even know there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That is where we are today. But let me use the contrary examples, humans could probably do the same thing. We are measuring inside the cow, on the cow with these wearable sensors. We're tracking movement, we're tracking temperature changes. But if you ask farmers what they use it for, of the 17 things that they could measure, they're probably only using it for fertility, for timing insemination. I've heard the same things being used on tractors. A John Deere tractor can do this, and this. When you ask farmers how many of those measurements, those metrics they're actually looking at, once told me, oh, I just look to see if the tractor is running or not running. And then I predict whether my workers are working or not working. So we have this extraordinary machine connected with extraordinary amount of information, and the power of that is not being used because we are humans and we're programmed to focus on one or two things, and we never get to all of those pieces, which again is the opportunity, Frank, for AI, because AI can absorb the complexity, evaluate multiple parameters at the same time, see patterns we don't see, learn to make changes, if allowed to make changes immediately, and not even involve a human. And that is that's where clearly we need to go. But this stage, perhaps not unlike the heart monitors, do humans really look at all the information and understand all the information and use all the information? I would argue probably not. Certainly, the majority of us don't. And the same way, as these tools arrive into the field and start to be more widely adopted, we're going to have to find systems and ways that don't rely upon the mood or the health or the desire of the farmer, of the user, to make smart decisions in real time based on that information.
That leads me to kind of think about that balance between individual benefits and community or more broad benefits, and the ability to actually realize those benefits, and those data sets are obviously available to all those farmers, but they don't are unlikely to have the time, the resources, or even the skills to dig into them with the depth needed to actually really realize those what the data is telling them. But then when you start looking at the bigger picture, and whether that's coordinating supply chains or predictions of diseases or the spread of diseases, so many things that could be identified from these data sets, um, they're not necessarily shared at the level where people could get that information out of them. And then above or across all of this, um, is who's paying for this work to be done, and how are any additional revenues and benefits shared across those that are involved. So in some ways, that's a very human um, centric perspective, but we are all humans at the end of the day as well.
Yeah, they're really good points, and I think these are the fears that I get from farmers when I stand up and say the future is AI. Um, what are we going to do with my data? And I said, well, your data is your data. You can't. Yes, but will somebody have access to it? Will they make decisions about what they want from me that change my behavior or cause me to lose money or not enjoy my work as much? And of course, that risk exists. The corruption of the potential for hacking comes up as well. But the societal benefits of being able to understand better what the impact is of decisions we have to take, fertilizing the soil, nutrients for our animals, um, on specifically environmental aspects, which are the bigger societal concern. Animal welfare comes up still, as we know. There's potential for us to create value, which probably the farmer today will not gain anything from, but the system will gain from, the planet will gain from, and that's something needs to be thought through as well. Of course, if we start to move towards autonomous systems that don't require farmers, then maybe that's not going to be our only concern. And clearly, there's some discussion about that coming as well. But today, if we do what I think we need to do from a productivity, performance, profitability perspective for the farmer, it's also going to generate huge amounts of information that could be used for these greater purposes. And sharing the value of that with the farming community is also very important.
So where's the discussion at in that space in terms of bringing people together, in terms of bringing in governments, departments of ag, funders to kind of somehow corral these ideas into a pathway forward?
Yeah, I'm not sure I see it at the moment. Is is the quick and easy answer? I do think I've seen. I mean, clearly governments are aware of this, and there are very appear to be very good discussions taking place around that at the moment at individual level. Um, I'm thinking of New Zealand. I'm thinking of discussions I've seen in Ireland. Thinking of smaller countries, perhaps that have and where farming still represents a considerable part of their GDP, of the gross domestic product. But additionally say I see the FAO. You know, they've appointed new people. Beth Betchdahl, an American who's there, former DG from China, Director General. They're very much leading into this. How do we bring informational technology and AI to the world to improve outcomes for our smallholder farmers, environmental concerns, etc. Now, whether they are the right group to bring these ideas is always going to be the question. You know, I typically like to see consortias of industry leaders funding, generating the ideas and doing it. But having tried to lead some of those myself, I can tell you it's also not easy to to get people in a room who may be competing in some ways or maybe not competing, should be like-minded, but where achieving that requires funding to come from different sources. Industry typically prefers to fund its own ideas, not to fund other people's ideas. So I'm not sure, Ash, that I totally understand where the right answer will end up. But what is clear to me is I think I'm definitely thinking about it, and I'm certainly not the only one thinking about it because I do see activity from these larger non-governmental groups, but equally non-industry groups.
Once again, lots of questions that have come up, and I need to decide which one. So more flattery for you, mate. Um, I think there's two things that come particularly from that, and one is when you start looking at the very granular side of things, people, companies, or organizations that can ring fence um, some IP around the use of AI, and I'm thinking specifically in terms of understanding microbiomes, developing vaccines, those sort of things where you can get a lot of really granular data on the biology and the metabolism, and then use that to rapidly accelerate the development of a vaccine or a health product or something like that, but you can keep it within the company. And the other side of it, and um, if you sort of look at what's happened in Ukraine and Russia and how the Ukrainians have endorsed or embraced drone technology and AI, and how that's changed the battlefield, and it seems, I'm not going to predict the future, but it seems to be having an impact on the conflict in Ukraine, and it's also led to the Ukrainians being one of the major suppliers of protective or defensive drone systems or AI-driven systems to Middle East countries that were recently attacked by Iran. So you've got the fact that there's traditional businesses or traditional industries that have been spending billions on developing certain equipment over decades, and then suddenly this Ukrainian system seems to leapfrog some of the existing much more expensive industries and end up being the preferred technology of choice. And I guess that whole side of things is are we going to do we expect that something new is just going to come and leapfrog the system and very much disrupt what we've got because the incumbents can't necessarily move fast enough?
Yeah, I do. And I think there's lots of concern about that. If I'm in a traditional software business, if I'm in um, an area involved with agronomy or nutrition, nutritional science or veterinarian science, is it possible something could be invented that would so totally disrupt my business that I puts me out of business? I think we're starting to see examples of that. I met with a group that has been crowdsourcing ideas for nutritional formulation, and they basically are using ChatGPT to design a system for formulating feed for animals. And the cost of doing that, of course, is effectively for free. There's the compute time from. I looked at the system. I don't think it's better than what else is out there, but it's pretty close. And by crowdsourcing, I mean that they have people online checking the system, testing the system, who are nutritionists and therefore are contributing, saying, yes, I like this. This is better than what I've used before. Can you make this better? Some versions of that are going to happen to a greater and greater degree. The piece that I think we have underestimated, certainly I personally have underestimated in agriculture, is the conservative nature of people who've done things the same way for a long time, switching to a new model. And I've always thought it's like, well, I don't want to change from an iPhone because it's uncomfortable. I don't want to do that. It's uncomfortable. But actually, it's far greater than that. And I think the switching cost and therefore the cost of selling, marketing, communicating, and convincing users to change is very, very high in our business, in all aspects of our business. And that is a fundamental barrier to concepts or ideas or AI systems creating apps for us that we really need. The challenge today is that getting people to start using whatever the new thing is just seems to take a long time and therefore costs money. And that's where I see the barrier to engagement. Using it, like using Claude to design to write better algorithms within a company that needs algorithms, an agribusiness business or food business, absolutely no problem understanding that. Um, Using ChatGPT to redesign a workflow, no problem with seeing how that works. But this piece of changing the behaviors on farm cannot be underestimated, and is the reason why legacy systems, quite often that are not that particularly good, continue to be used by large numbers of users because the switching cost in their mind is too high.
That's a that's a very, very valid point. And I think one of the other things is that, much of society will think of farmers or ranchers as a cohesive group. They all look the same and they all behave the same. But they're as nuanced and diverse as any other group within a society. And so that behavioral change and moving away from legacy systems is, that's always been it has always been a very significant hurdle for any new technology in agriculture.
Yeah, and it's the same with feeding animals to reduce methane. microbials in fertilizer, producing food in a new system like a vertical farm. Um, it's those barriers are there, and they're there for good reason. Lots of people outside of agriculture are very judgmental in thinking, well, this is because they don't get it, they don't understand. But a lot of technologies that have arrived on the farm in the last 20, 30 years have failed. So, and certainly failed to deliver on the promises that were made. Um, Probably found a lower hanging fruit, a lower level at which they succeed. Um, but that has made us all very skeptical. And back to this piece of, do I really want to learn to use a new piece of software, a new app or new algorithm, if it's going to take me time and I'm going to have to give up the procedures and ways I've done things in the past? What is the incentive for me to do this? And it's surprising to me that that barrier is strong enough to withstand even sometimes big differences in cost or price.
On a slightly different note, in the last few days, Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, was speaking at a university here in the United States. And when he mentioned AI, he was actually booed by a bunch of the students. And, there's all the talk about AI taking jobs and, people going through university and not being able to get entry level jobs after they, spent 4 years and however much funding their degrees. Um, a- are you seeing similar backlashes against AI in discussions that you're having?
Um, I am not. I think what I've described is the two types of audience reaction. The one is where you get a show of hands of people that have their questions, have their ideas, and have their comments, which are typically positive, albeit some will say, I'm trying to imagine how this changes or what this does to my farm, to my business. I've had one audience that I remember specifically where there was just shocked silence at the end, end of my talk, as though, you know, I haven't thought about this. I know it's coming, but none of this sounds good. Um, and we kind of got a little bit of discussion on that then eventually through questions. But the initial moment was I wondered I wondered what I was going to say next. But the ways in which AI is affecting the lives of young people are obviously extraordinarily scary for them. I was contacted by a mother. Um, she works in agriculture. Her son wants to get involved with the financial world. This year, Goldman Sachs, I believe, received 640,000 applications. And, how many people did they take? A handful. Because we're living in a world where I can be in any country in the world, I can apply online, I can write my resume using AI. It is likely that the first people interviewed by them, by Goldman, or by McKinsey, or by whoever, I don't want to insert the agri names because they'll probably call your show afterwards and say, well, we don't do that. But majority of young people reporting they're now going onto an AI platform to do the first interview. So they're being interviewed by AI. AI screening the resumes, the CVs that are received. So we have young people writing their applications using AI, screened by AI in the first screening, being interviewed by AI online. I mean, you can understand why they would be scared and concerned about their future. And then walking into companies where a lot of the jobs will be massively disrupted in the near future. That's not a discussion I hear in farming communities, but it's a discussion that I listen to every day from real people, from people I know, from conversations, and it's particularly concerning for parents, clearly, who parents of kids who don't know what to say because we've never existed with this before, we've never been in this reality before. And as you said, I've, traditionally went to university 4 years, came out, great, got a job. Which jobs are going to be most affected? I ask that of my 40 AI panel experts, and in particular those who were specialized in AI said the jobs you need to be concerned are the thinking jobs, the management jobs. You need to think about even all of these jobs that are done by the board, or all these jobs done by the managers. Um, the jobs are more secure. We'll call it blue collar workers in the factory, on the farm, in the field. Those are harder to replace. They'll be maybe replaced by robotics, but robotics is taking longer to get there. And won't do it easily, or as easily as we imagine, as quickly as we imagine. So, do you tell your kids you've gone to university, but whatever you've learned probably won't be of use to you in whatever jobs you're looking for, and you might end up doing a job that does not use your brain? Or do you tell your kids it's time for you to learn how to work with AI, not instead of AI or not against AI? But I could see why at universities we're going to see probably more activism against AI. And that is a natural reaction of young people whose future, the future that they were promised or the future they read about, is not going to be the one that we're going to see.
I that's obviously something that is much, much bigger than what we will address or solve on
Good,
our
good.
conversation this
Glad to
morning
hear
or
it.
today. I was recently in a listening to a talk at Stanford University, and it was between Rishi Sunak, the former British PM, and Condoleezza Rice and a few others,
Yeah.
and discussing AI and that whole fear of AI and the backlash against AI was part of that, but also how it's a very where it impacts a job is very uneven. It'll impact certain tasks hugely, whereas other tasks it won't impact. When you think about your day-to-day work and the things you do, parts of it'll take over, but others it won't. And I think there was discussion about how you need to think about those roles in a different way and the skills that, still do need humans. And the other thing that came up from that is that the more experienced people, the top level managers and thinkers are much less vulnerable than the entry level people. But the challenge there is if you don't get any entry level people, you'll never get the people who are experienced because um, you need to start somewhere.
Totally. And we will have exactly that same pipeline problem in agriculture, because if you think through people you meet in business, they worked for Purina, they worked for Cargill, they've worked for ADM, and those companies brought in entry level people and gave them the opportunity to travel the world and learn lots of businesses from the inside out, and make mistakes and do good things and bad things. And that's what our business has been based on. Um, and when you see the big crop companies, when you see the big food companies cutting back on their recruitment, feeling that AI will replace, even if we're not entirely sure how it's going to do it today, we're going to invest in AI and we're not going to invest in people. There is a bigger issue at stake, which is, as you describe, where the future leader is going to come from.
And we spent the last 40 or so minutes talking about AI, and this is probably a similar occurrence to the current investment landscape, where all the other technologies seems to get pushed to the side, and AI kind of swallows up all the oxygen. So on the non-AI side of things, what are you seeing at the moment that you find particularly interesting or exciting, and the opportunities that could realize?
Yeah, I'm, as we know from the previous conversation, excited by everything all the time, and like you, very enthusiastic about people coming through your door. putting something on your desk that really looks like it's going to transform the way we do irrigation, the way we do fertilization, the way we feed, um, and what we deliver to the consumer. The AI does feel like it needs to be sprinkled on everything, particularly if you're looking for investors. And that's probably fair. I mean, it is along with fintech, financial tech, it's the two areas that are getting the funding. So you do want to have AI within your, but I'll come back to the beginning of our conversation. The data capture is the critical issue for us. The use of AI is not the problem. AI exists, AI will be able to help us, but we need to be sure that we're feeding the right things into the sausage maker. And at this stage, I'm not sure we do. So I wrote a blog on LinkedIn about a month ago um, on animal livestock technologies that I thought people should be paying attention to. And I picked businesses that had valuations of, let's call it 100 million plus, maybe revenues of 10 million, and that they're making money. Now, that already gets rid of, as you know, Ash, that gets rid of 99% of the companies that we talk to. Um, but it wasn't being bad to anybody else. It's just saying these are companies who've arrived for me. And I listed 10. One of them, ironically, was AgriWeb, which, of course, has just been acquired by Eurus, which was another one of my 10. Um, and DSM, which works on Virax, and Sustel, I was another one of my 10, and they're also involved within CVC. So the private equity group funding all of this is the same group. So there were 4 or 5 more companies came to me afterwards and said, I'm surprised you didn't list us. We have great ideas as well. But when I look at Smacks Tech, I think it's a great technology. Um, is it better than the wearables? I think it is. Yeah, I think it's better than something that you attach to the collar of a cow or a ear tag on a cow. I think having something inside the cow, measuring what's happening in the digestive system in real time in a I'll call it non-invasive way because it doesn't go obviously it's in the stomach and then it just stays there. I really, really think that's an amazing technology. And I think the potential for that technology to measure more in real time about how digestion occurs exists. I really like your fellow Australians from X-Sites. What they're doing in pigs is tremendous. So, but all of these are collecting information more accurately um, in real time. AI is the glue, as I like to call it, is the part that brings it all together, either from multiple sources or just uses that information to make better decisions. Those are the things that excite me. Prop side um, can feels like we've been a little bit slower recently on the data side, but continue to see new ideas for how to fertilize better, how to retain water in the in the soils better, how to get better biodiversity from a microbial perspective. Those are things I really like. And again, where we are capturing information, we're going to allow ourselves to use AI to make better decisions from that data. So for me, um, the AI is underpins everything or hovers above everything, whichever analogy you want to use. Uh, the critical part is to get companies with traction who start to get business with farmers, growers, producers that we can then use to make these decisions. And thankfully, I do believe that those are coming.
Excuse the analogy, but I think it's very, very chicken and egg because it's like if you look at facial recognition technology, when the first versions of that were fairly rubbish. But as you've got bigger and bigger and bigger data sets, and Facebook's probably got almost more to do with this than anyone else, that facial recognition technology just became better and better now that you can have a picture of a crowd and it will actually identify many people within that. So it comes down to if we can get these systems out there collecting that data and then start feeding that data into the AI platforms to pull the value out of it, um, you're going to have a lot more information to be able to fine tune that metabolism, be it the plants or the animals or the soils or whatever, much more precisely and efficiently. But you've got that hurdle of collecting the data in the beginning and then ground truthing the data and making sure that data is clean. So what you're feeding in is actually going to provide those insights. And is there any other approach other than just the clunky? We just push along and clunk, 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 clunk until you know, it gets better?
I
Or is
don't
that
know that
even
there
the wrong
is.
approach?
Yeah. No, I don't know that there is. At least not from where we're starting. Um, it's very clear to me that information captured can be the wrong information, can be misinterpreted, that you need to go through your AI very carefully and curate it and cut out where it's receiving either the wrong information or it's getting too precise to a specific location. So you get this focused funneling effect where the AI starts to create a solution to one circumstance in one environment on one farm, and it's not generalizable enough. But in essence, capturing lots of information is, yes, for me, is the starting point of all of that. And cleaning and curating it is the second step that we will take within, what we need to do. But today we just haven't had enough of the information. And your face recognition is a really good example because yeah, it was a very clunky system to start with and often made mistakes. People say, "Are you worried by AI's hallucinations?" I say, "Yeah, no, of course I'm concerned." When I run a report on myself and discover that I've done things I never did and have superhuman capabilities I didn't know because it's just made it up. That's not good. But I also know that it's getting better because each time I ask it or inquire or ask it to do something for me, it gives me more and more accurate answers because it's getting better as it moves along. We're going to face that same thing in agriculture. When we first use AI, when we are, as we are now, as we use AI for the first time on top of information, when we get hallucinations, people say, "Oh, that shows me AI doesn't work in agriculture." Say, no, just shows to me the information we're feeding into the AI systems is not robust enough. It's not accurate enough. And as we get better at collecting information and are collecting more information for it, it will get better. It won't be simply more is better. It won't be simply throw more in and we're going to get a better answer, but more definitely helps. It's definitely part of the answer.
I think if you go back to your bullet train analogy, if you step back a bit and say, well, that was all dependent on the invention of the wheel, and go back to pre-Roman times and all those sorts of things, and how clunky those wheels were for millennia before we even got close to a train and then to a bullet train. Um, Maybe we need to work through some of that clunkiness. Maybe it's
Yeah,
inevitable.
yeah, no, it's a good way to look at it. But the bullet train is interesting to me because when I read back the story of what happened, and Henry Ford was another example of where the assumption is Henry Ford comes in and says, "I know what we need to do. We need to design our system to look like this," and actually he had to change everything on the process of how a car is assembled and where people are and how things are done. Everything had to be reimagined when you go to it. So AI is not simply a layer on top of what we have at the moment. It will force us to reinvent, to redesign, and to reimagine everything we do.
One further thing that we haven't touched on yet, and that's the power consumption of these systems, which is enormous. Data centers and data warehouses can use more electricity than entire countries. Um, how do you see that conundrum?
Maybe I'm just being simplistic or capitalistic or whatever phrase you want to use for it, but so long as you give me AI for free, I'm going to use it. And we're just going to, it appears like we're just going to, like Thelma and Louise, we're just going to drive this car right over the cliff. and nobody's going to slow down. So until it starts being priced in at a level which reflects the fact that this has an environmental impact, I don't know how we stop it. Nobody is going to say, I want my Google search back. I want to throw away my Gemini because Gemini does a better job, and I get it for free. I can get it for free. I can even pay a small fee to get it for slightly more money. And at that stage, I've got a better product and I'm not going to say no to it. I think the interesting thing for farming can be when we think of what happens to the water cooling systems involved in these data centers. Um, is there a role for that water to be used in agriculture? For me, that's an interesting conversation to have. Uh, could we generate more power on the farm? Yes. Could we generate it through solar, wind, hydrothermal, methane, methane digesters, etc., etc., etc.? And how does that power on the farm become useful to data centers? Somebody said, well, you could produce bitcoins on the farm. I don't know how far we want to take it, but farms could be considered to be energy generators, power plants, not just agricultural centers for producing food. And the logical stage at that stage would be to move those data centers closer to farms. So there is some interesting, bigger thinking, I think, that could occur in terms of how our farming future looks if we start thinking about how we become synergists with the requirement for data processing. But do I imagine a situation where people are going to turn back and say, no, we don't want AI because it's costing too much for energy? Absolutely no way. Like this is inevitable. We're on the slope we are sliding towards, and
It feels much more Thelma and Louise-ish than people, walking away from it for sure.
totally, totally, yeah.
We're almost at time. So before we go, is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't already discussed?
No, I think Ash, it shows like this, people like you, um, hopefully people like me, just trying to get people thinking, get people understanding. This is not incomprehensible. This is not so big that we need to run away from it or ignore it, which clearly was the reaction of that audience I mentioned. Conversely, I've got people that think everything is going to be amazing and it's going to happen tomorrow morning, and that's not going to happen either. I think the people who want to think about this have the opportunity, they have the time to really see how this will fundamentally change their lives and their businesses and their families. But what I would say to anybody listening is don't let don't wait for somebody else to do this first. Don't wait to see how somebody else gets on before. This is very accessible technology. It's very affordable. People say, well, I don't want to pay $20 a month, but they still pay $20 a month for awful lot of other things that they probably don't even realize. So I think you should be downloading ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok or Claude or whatever it is that your favorite one is. When I was with Teddy Bacaley of Land O'Lakes, he had 5 LLMs on his phone, which might be more than most of us want to do. But he said, "Look, I'm just constantly keeping track to see." Of course, he's Chief Innovation Officer with Land O'Lakes and reports directly to the board and to Beth. In that situation, it's clear why you'd want to keep up with what's going on. But even week to week, I moved from ChatGPT to Gemini. I like it better. Claude has made some huge leap forward in terms of power and abilities effectively in the last 3-4 weeks. Um, but at the same time, it's also become slower because so many people are using it. The thing has slowed down. But I think get started with whatever you feel comfortable getting started with. But don't ignore this. Don't wait for somebody else to do it. Don't be late to this party. This is not a party you want to arrive late to. That would be my main take home message.
Aidan, as always, it's an absolute pleasure to speak with you. So thank you very, very much.
Ash, as I said at the beginning, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to the Ash Cloud. Please subscribe to Ash Cloud if you've enjoyed this podcast, where I will continue to discuss food sustainability with guests who bring a deep understanding of the environmental, political and cultural challenges facing our society and creative ideas on how to address them.